This is a follow-up on a couple of viewer questions in reference to my octave series about the size of the hands and ways to navigate this. This is a great question, and it's a very personal question because everybody's built a little bit differently. I am actually only 5'8". I'm not the tallest guy, but I am blessed with pretty good sized hands, not because my fingers are long, but because my stretch mostly comes from my ability to make my thumb and my pinky almost like a straight line across. I've had some students whose hands are actually bigger than mine, but where they get bottled up that blocks them and their hand ultimately doesn't stretch as far is the skin here. Now, there's not much you can do about that in terms of changing that, unless you want to have a really grisly experiment in your kitchen or something with a knife. Of course, don't do that. But I would recommend, sometimes when I have a high school student, I'll say, okay, when you're sitting in your algebra class or something, just firmly but gently take that thumb and stretch that out and see what kind of angle you can make. As I look at my students' hands, this is a little bit different shape for all of them. Some can they make a less than a 90-degree angle, and I don't know what mine is. Mine's probably about 120 degrees or so. So that's where you're going to get a lot of size and stretching. So I can just barely reach on the outside of the key an 11th. A viewer had said they could only reach a 10th, and I thought, well, that's great. You're in a perfectly fine position, a very normal hand size, if even a little bit medium-large hand size. So this is great. Now, if you can't reach an octave, this creates other challenges, but there are ways to navigate them too. If reaching an octave you can only reach on the outside of the key, well, a few things you could think about. First, your hero needs to be the pianist Alicia de la Rocha. As you may know, this incredible and legendary Spanish pianist was apparently like 4'10". She could barely reach an octave, and while she specialized in playing Scarlatti and Mozart, I mean, really the most perfect Mozart out there. But she also, especially in her earlier career, had played the big repertoire, the Brahms Concerti, the Rachmaninoff Concerti, and she was, by her own admission, said that she sometimes would leave out notes, and she frequently redistributed the hands to cover these things. And I'm very convinced that the composers would not care about that, especially with the quality of her playing. So just a couple things to think about. I've recommended to use fourth finger when playing octaves on the black notes. Now, depending on the size of the hand, this is going to change the geometry of your positioning. Because if your hand is smaller, every time you move to the fourth finger, I'll exaggerate here, you'll end up turning slightly to do that. And at a certain point, thus the smaller the hand size is, you want to eliminate these little twisty motions because they're going to get in the way. So at a certain point, 5-5-5 is probably going to be a fine fingering. So 5-5-5 this way, which I'm totally not used to. I've practiced that. I'm so used to fourth finger. Another viewer had asked about loud octaves, and I was going to address this, or powerful octaves, in a subsequent video on octave playing, but fast octaves are light octaves, and I could do a number of videos on this idea that playing loud is actually an illusion. There are certain notes that are loud, but generally you're playing medium loud with certain things highlighted. So if I played now, that sounds powerful, but there was a trick. I played loud at the beginning, and then I cut my volume by about half, but I had the pedal down. Because the louder I play, the deeper I'm playing into the keys, which is going to actually slow me down. So I play, I create, we'll call it light in the beginning, in the sense of something loud and explosive, and then it's in the shadow of that sound, which is in the shadow with a pedal. And then I get louder at the end. So if you listen carefully, the volume actually changes that. I'm not playing particularly loud throughout the entire passage, so it's a little bit of an illusion. In terms of octave playing, though, and especially if you have a smaller hand, I would recommend proceed carefully playing octaves. it's not a surprise that De La Rocha played all that Scarlatti and Mozart so beautifully, because it does not have these big hand stretches, and your hands, and like all of your joints, they prefer what I call mid-level motions. So yes, you might be able to stretch this way, but your hand does not like being at that outer range of its extension. It prefers in more of just kind of a standard resting position as opposed to this position. It's a little like your power steering. When you turn all the way to the right or all the way to the left in your car, you can hear that there's kind of some kind of noise as it reaches that outer limit. So it prefers being more in the middle range. So be careful as you practice octaves. You're taxing your hand both because they're in an open position and you're using essentially twice as many fingers. If one was to practice octaves for hours a day, you will quickly injure yourself, especially if they're not working well. So be careful with that. One other suggestion, if you have a smaller hand, I would, again, keep things light, and the place where things get bound up in terms of being tight tends to be the thumb, which is your strongest. It's your strongest finger. I always say it's kind of half man, half beast. You've got all this muscle here, and as soon as that gets locked, that's going to slow you down and cause fatigue and maybe almost like a hand cramp in a way. So as you're playing your octaves, you might practice with your thumb. You'll notice I'm playing staccato with the thumb while I hold my fifth finger down to keep that as light as possible. And I will address this in other videos, but the wrist is the engine of your technique, and especially in everything, but in your octave playing, you want to make sure that your wrist is relaxed as well. So if you have other questions, please let me know as you continue to enjoy these videos, and I appreciate you watching these piano think videos.